Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today fulfilled a lifelong dream to be a published author at the age of 66. Since that time, she has published 6 highly regarded novels as well as 2 cookbooks. Among the many awards her work has garnered is the prestigious International Best Indie Book Award for her 4th work, a contemporary romance entitled Chasing Hope. A strong advocate for new writers, she started a podcast in 2020 called A Writer's Life, where she shares her experiences and provides tips on writing as well as inspiration and education. A 6th-generation Texan, she still resides in the Piney Woods. A die-hard romantic, her heartwarming stories are filled with strong women, second chances, and happily ever afters. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Nancy Hudgins, who writes under the pen name Dana Wayne.
Wow, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Nancy. Our opening question is always, so what took you so long to write your first book?
The short answer, life. A husband, 3 kids, a job, first one thing and another, but always that dream is just back over here, hovering on the edge of your vision, just waiting for its turn. And so then finally one day it came.
Well, tell us more about that. When you decided you had to write the book, what was your process?
Well, I've wanted to write my whole life. I've had a love affair with words since I was a child. My dad used to read paperback westerns, had a stack of them beside his chair, and he read from them every day. And I learned to appreciate the written word sitting in his lap while he read passages to me. And so I said to myself, a long time ago, when I grow up, that's what I want to do. I want to be the person that can paint a picture with words. And so that was my goal, always in the back of my mind. And then I was working in home health in the early 90s. And we had a traveling nurse who was one of our staff at the time. And I was visiting with her one day, and she was talking about traveling around, and she and her husband, she was retired, and her husband was retired, so she retired and went into travel nursing. And so they had a motorhome, and they just went all these places. Well, I was sitting inputting data into one of our computer systems, and all of a sudden this what if popped into my head. What if it wasn't a married lady traveling with her husband? What if she were a single lady? And then a writer has 4 favorite words: what if and the end. So each what if by the time I got home that evening, I had this whole scenario started in my head. So I got my little yellow tablet, and here I went, because I didn't have a computer at home at that time. I had a typewriter, but not a computer. So I started jotting down all these ideas that I had. And then over the years, those ideas or thoughts would come to me at, just odd times. And they were scribbled on napkins, on scraps of paper, on Post-it notes, just whatever I happened to have when inspiration struck. And then one day he gave me we got this computer, the big old floppy disk thing. It took up half the space on the desk. And so I started trying to get all those bits and pieces into some kind of cohesive order. But still, life is going on and you're still working and you still got kids and all this was happening. So I never really got to give it the time that it needed to be formed into a cohesive story. But it didn't stop me from trying. I still did it when I thought about it. And then my in later years, I traveled for a living, so I was home very seldom. I mean, I would come home on the weekend, change suitcases, and go out again. But I was working in healthcare still, so the idea just kept, and it went through several iterations over these probably 10 or 12 years that I piddled with it, and until it became Secrets of the Heart, which was published in 2016. So it was a long drawn out process that would have been shorter had I had the time to devote to it. But once I did, once I retired, I kind of got reacquainted with my family for the first 6 months. And then after that, I started writing. It took me forever because I had files on my computer. I had, gone through several different computers by this point, and you just save it and transfer it, save it and transfer it. And so it took a long time to go from the beginning to the end. And then still, there were changes that were made along the way that um, even it got to the point where I couldn't go forward with it. I had gotten almost to, well, probably the last third of the book, and I just couldn't make it. I couldn't make the story do what I wanted it to do. And so I'd gone to a writer's workshop, and I met a gentleman there by the name of Caleb Purtle, and Caleb is a very prolific author. He's well known. He's got probably 60 or 70 books, and he has worked for newspapers. He's got all this background. And so I was basically crying on his shoulder that, writer's block is killing me. And he said, "You just need to get out of the way." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You're trying to make the story do what you want it to do versus letting the story take you where it wants to go." And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. How can the story tell me where to go? And he said, "You'll know when you do it." He said, "Go back, just backtrack to the point where the story made sense, and then anything after that, take it out and get rid of it." And I went, those words were too hard to come by. I cannot get rid of them. And he said, "Just save them into another file, stuff I might use later, and then go back and finish it." And it took me about 3 days to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to take his advice. I'm just going to backtrack. And I ended up taking out almost 3 chapters. And taking those 3 chapters out of my story was like, I felt like I was taking one of my kids and putting them outside. But I put them in a file, and I did use bits and pieces of it. But he was right. Once I listened to the story, and that's the thing that non-writers probably have well, I know they do, have a difficult time understanding, is that if you are really into that story, if the story is flowing, then it takes control and it's going to tell you, no, you don't need to go here, you need to go there. So that's what I did. And when I hit the end, even I was surprised by it because it was totally different from what I envisioned. And it went on to win first place in a contest sponsored by the Texas Association of Authors. And I was just over the moon. I never looked back. I just kept writing.
Did you always know you wanted to write romance?
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of us, have fade to black romance scenes in our novels. We can't
Mhm.
really make them
Mhm.
as romantic as some people do.
Well, there's a difference between, to me, romance is about emotion. It's not about sex. I write very emotional stories. All of my stories are very character driven versus being plot driven. And it's the journey that the couple make from "I'm never going to love again" until happily ever after. And it's that journey that's important. It's not the destination. Now, my books do have a love scene in them, usually towards the end. One, very seldom more than one. Sometimes it's two. It just depends on the book. But that for the first love scene was difficult to write. I don't go into a lot of description, but there is some. And so when I got to that part, I just put insert love scene here and kept writing because I had to get it in my head how I wanted it to go. Because again, it's just like everything else. People are different, stories are different. So everything has to fit both the story and the characters. But I'm such an optimist that romance was the logical choice for me. I love to read. I'll read anything. It doesn't matter as long as it's a good story. I'll read it. But my husband tells me all the time that I'm such an optimistic person that if I walked into a room full of horse manure, I'd immediately start looking for a pony, and that's me to a T. I mean, I don't ignore the bad that's out there. I know it's there, but I don't let it govern me. I like looking for my pony.
Well, it sounds like you've really found your formula. Do you follow those formulas that romance readers really require of their writers?
I think I do. I write, like I said, I write very character-driven stories, and the comment that I get most often from my readers is that my characters are so believable. You know, you read some love stories or romances, and the characters are just too perfect. You know, they everything is right, and then they say hello, and the next thing you know, they're hooking up, and you're like, well, where's the story? Where's the building of that relationship? And so that's one thing, and I'm very uh, flattered and pleased that they'll tell me that. In fact, one lady told me that the male character in Chasing Hope, she said, "Oh my gosh, I could fall in love with that man." And she said, "It's just that the characters are so well developed that they feel real and the situations feel real. It's not something that is beyond your ability to say, oh, yeah, that could happen."
That's a real gift to develop characters that are so believable. Nancy, you're one of a small group of our authors on my podcast who write under a pen name, although
Mhm.
some have several for the very different genres that they write. What
Mhm.
convinced you to choose a name other than your own?
Actually, my mother did that. And I was a freshman in high school, and we were having one of those "what are you going to be when you grow up" conversations. And I've always wanted to write, and she knew that. But my maiden name, I just didn't feel like it sounded very writery. So I was telling Mama, I said, you know, Scroggins, that's nothing. There's nothing writery about that. I need a writer's name. So my middle name is Diana. So she said, "Oh, well, what about Dana or Dana or Dana?" And I said, "Well, I like that. It's short. That's good. But I need a name to go with it." And she immediately said Wayne because John Wayne was her favorite actor. So ta-da! Dana Wayne was born. And that's why I use it to this day. It was because we came up with, or she basically came up with it, and I said, "Oh, yeah, that's good." So she didn't live to see my first book published, but she knew that I was writing, and she was always very encouraging. And it wouldn't matter what I wrote; she would just love it. I did some newspaper things. I did some anthologies for writers groups and stuff like that. And she said, "Is that a Nancy or is that a Dana?" I said, "Well, no, I'm still, that's my nonfiction stuff." So one day I'm still working on that book one of these days, and I'd read her passages to it from time to time, and she was just always very supportive and encouraging. So that's why I use Dana Wayne.
Well, tell us more about your podcast. You have a podcast for writers. Tell us some of the topics, the popular topics, maybe among your listeners.
I do. I have a podcast. It's called A Writer's Life. And in it, I talk about different aspects of writing, tips on marketing, how to build characters, the importance of secondary characters. Writing from the male point of view, because all of my books are a dual point of view. I write from both the male and the female. And so I did a podcast on how to write from the male point of view because a totally different mindset, and uh, and then but characters and just different tips and on that. And I'm a little behind on getting into that because of things that's going on this year, but I'm working on a new one. It'll probably be up in the next week. So but it's always about writing, and I always end with sometimes excerpts from my books, um, uh, or things that if I did some author interviews, and I'm going to do some more of those, and just things like that. It's basically for writers. And then if somebody has a topic that they would like me to address, they just put it in the comments or drop me an email. And in fact, one of my characterization um, podcasts, that was how it came about, was somebody requested it. And I have listeners all over the world, and that's pretty cool.
That's very cool.
Hmm.
And you touched on a topic that is very concerning to a lot of writers these days is writing out of their culture, whether it's a woman writing as a man, whether it's a white Caucasian person writing as a different race. That's become a hot button in our industry today. How do you address that?
Well, I feel like as long as the character is true to that character, then it doesn't matter. I mean, as long as you don't step over the line and say or do something that that person would not, then and I try to be very, aware of those things, and be as sensitive as I can to make sure that if a character is portrayed in a certain way, that that is how it's done.
And you've become quite prolific in your writing life and turning out these books as quickly as you do. How do you get your ideas and plots for the books?
I am a pantser all the way. I don't outline, I don't plan, and my stories come to me, believe it or not, 9 times out of 10, I'll dream something and I wake up with this character in my head. Uh, and it's like, okay. And the book that I'm working on now is I saw a photograph of this guy sitting on a horse. I was scrolling through one of the photo sites, looking for images for ads or things that I was working on. And this guy was sitting on a horse, and he was looking out over this mesa type thing, and I couldn't decide if he was happy or sad. And so immediately it was like, why is he here? Why is he happy? Is he sad? Why did he come to this place? Why is he sitting here like that? And I came up with a story, and that's the one I'm working on right now. Um, Unveiling Beulah, I woke up in the middle of the night with this lady's image in my head that was, she was 30 something, and that's all I knew was that she was 30 something. She had a scar on her face. And I woke up, and my writer's brain, and my husband knows if I get up in the middle of the night, if he wakes up and I'm not here, he knows I'm probably back in my office. So I got to thinking, okay, what is that scar for? How old is she? What does she look like? Why does she sad? And then that's how it comes up. But 9 times out of 10, it's something that I see or hear that sparks an image, and my characters come to me first. I will get a character in my head, and then I figure out what story goes with that character. And it's usually once I get the character, the main character in my head, the first, 1,000 words or nothing. I can get busy on that. Is after that, you start adding in all the other what ifs and the other things that are going on, and then it gets a little more challenging. But it takes me about a year to do a book start to finish. I know there are people out there that can write much faster, but I just don't know how they do it and maintain the quality, because by the time you finish it, then you've got I have beta readers, I have editors, I have proofreaders, and everybody, and then I have a critique group that I work with, and so I don't see how they can do it. But,
I don't
to each his
either.
own. This
It,
works for me, and I'm happy with it.
it's a long process.
It
And
is.
if you're having dreams about these characters, does that mean you are a morning person? Do you write in the morning or do you?
I have to do it in the morning. When I get up, I get up and we drink coffee and I fix breakfast and then I'm back here by 9 o'clock. And then I'll write till usually around after lunch is usually when I call it when the words dry up. But if I still want to keep writing, every writer has this to be written folder. So if I'm working on my current works and I get stuck and I'm not sure what direction I need to go, then I just close it out and open another one. And I'll look at that and say, oh yeah, I'll add a few words here and add a few words there. And then if I'm not really feeling it, I'll close that and do another one. And then when all that doesn't work, I'm also a crafter. I make a lot of things. I tell people all the time I write, I cook, and I make things. And I make these tabletop Christmas trees that I learned from my mother, and I take those to craft sales. I always take those with my books. But yeah, I'm definitely a morning person. By the afternoon, I'm usually doing something else.
Well, you're a true artist if you're crafting as well. So you're talented in a lot of different areas. Tell us about your publishing journey, the first book, and as well as these other books. Have you had the same challenges? Tell us what worked and what didn't work.
When I finished Secrets of the Heart, which was my first book, and it was in the process of being edited, I went to a couple of writers' conferences and I spoke to, the thing is that I didn't decide I was going to self-publish. I was late in the decision to do that because I just wasn't sure. I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I was at this writers conference. I talked to a couple of agents, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this is something we can market. We can do this." And then I learned that just because somebody a publishing house buys your book doesn't mean they're going to publish it right away. It could sit on the shelf for 2 to 3 years. And when they told me that, I'm like, crap, I'm 66 years old. I could be dead before it publishes. So I said, no, thank you. And then regardless of whether you self-publish or traditional publish, you still have to do all the marketing yourself. Unless you're, Sandra Brown or Nora Roberts, they're not going to. No, they may do a little bit, but they're not going to do much. The rest of it's going to be up to you. So I'm like, I'm going to do all the work. You're going to get a cut. The publisher's going to get a cut, and I'm going to get a little piece of the pie down the road. Uh, no, thank you. So then I started looking at self-publishing, and that's a whole other process altogether. And I found a small press, local small press, that would, take care of getting that book published. And so that's the route that I went. And eventually that press closed. So I have another lady now that she takes care of getting my books formatted, getting them uploaded into all the different platforms and things like that. I don't have to do that piece of it. But self-publishing for me was the only way to go because, well, they could, I made this book and they're going to tell me that I have to change the cover and, you have to take this out and you have to put this in. And I'm like, no, then it's your version of my book and not my book. So self-publishing was really what worked for me. Everybody isn't that way, and so to each his own. But I highly recommend it just because of the control that you are able to have over the finished product.
Well, writers have certainly more options than ever before.
Oh
So
yeah,
they have a lot of choices, a lot of options they can
they
choose
do.
from. But, so many still don't want to do that marketing. Have you found anything that works for you in that?
The biggest piece of marketing for me is person to person. Social media is fine, and I do that, but you cannot beat going to book fairs, craft fairs, to book shows, festivals, any kind of an event that will let you set up a booth. You need to go there because there's nothing that's going to beat that one-on-one. I go to an event in Fort Worth every fall, and I have since my second book came out. every year when I go, people look for me because they want to know, do you have a new book? And that you cannot beat. I would rather have 10 people buy every one of my books than one person buy 10. So it's just you can't beat that one-on-one, and nothing will make a writer prouder than to go somewhere and they say, "Oh, I was looking for you. Please tell me you have a new book." And that's what you want. It's that person to person. Social media is fine, but when you're doing that, you are a very small fish in a ginormous pond. And oh, and get outside of your area. Once you've sold books to all your friends and family, that market is gone. So you need to expand outside, and that's what I like to do. I'll do a search for, I say, how far am I willing to travel to market my book? And then I say, okay, I'm going to go in this radius, and I'll just start calling the Chamber of Commerce for, like, say, Pittsburgh. Do you have any events coming up where I can set up a booth? And then you just make arrangements and there you go. And some places will allow you to share a booth with someone else. So if you have another writer friend, maybe somebody that's new that's starting out, bring them along. Let them, go through that so they get a taste of what it's like. Because that's a hard thing to do too, especially for most writers, as because we're writing is a solitary endeavor. We spend so much time alone. Sometimes it's a little hard to step outside and, you know, push yourself as in essence on someone, but you have to do that. That's part of the business. And having somebody to kind of guide you in that endeavor is very helpful. And we do that a lot around here. I have several writers that I share booths with all the time.
That helps to share expenses too.
It does. It does.
And you can brainstorm with each other. And
Hmm.
writers are so generous to share
They
their
are.
advice and what's worked for them and what hasn't.
And we have this thing in this little group that I kind of hang out with, and we call it the pitch and pass. I write romance. Romance is a niche genre. Not everybody likes it. And if I'm with somebody, like I go with this guy a lot that's a sci-fi guy, and then I have another lady who writes cozy mysteries. And then, so when I pretty quick if they're interested in what you're selling. If they're not, pass them on to them. What do you like to read? Maybe you would enjoy these cozy mysteries or this historical fiction or sci-fi fantasy, and it works, and we all do that for each other, and that helps a lot too.
Well, you're in the right genre because romance is the best selling
It
genre
is.
out there.
Mhm. It is. It accounts for almost 50% of the fiction market. Just a little quick fact for you: most average fiction readers will read 3 to 5 books a year. A romance reader will read that much in a week.
Wow.
Uh, I've sometimes, when I'm just not in a writing mood, when I want to read, I'll read 3 books in a day or 2 days because I start
Wow.
reading and I don't stop till I finish. So,
Well, we want to hear about your book that you're going to tell us about, and then read a few sections for us so we can hear that voice and tone in
okay.
your book.
Um, Secrets of the Heart, like I said, is my first book, and it's the story of a hospice nurse who is recovering from her own personal tragedy. And so it's been 2 years later, and she's at the point where she's like, my gosh, my family, I love them, but they're smothering me. I have got to do something. I need to get outside of my comfort zone. I just need to get away. So she takes a job. She finds she works at a hospital. So she made contact with the guy there, and he tells her about this man that he knows in Montana who needs a hospice nurse for his mother. So she takes that job, and at this point, the part I'm going to read to you, when she arrives in Montana, it was a terrible flight. It was delayed. It was a real rough, and she's in this little um town, and when she gets there, the guy's very curt and gruff and tells her that, things have changed and you have to go back. And she's like, "What do you mean? Did your mother pass away?" And he said, "No, it's just things have changed." So it's very strained at that point, and she's going to have to spend the night at this local motel, and he's still trying to decide, what he needs to tell her. And so this is kind of explains the setup for what she gets into when she gets there. What I'd like, she turned to face him, is an explanation, and I don't think I'm asking too much. He had to give her credit. She didn't waste time or mince words. He wished he had some of her gumption right now. He remained standing, rolling his hat brim around in his hands. It's a complicated story. She crossed her arms and stared at him. He took a calming breath. Well, everything was fine until yesterday. What happened yesterday? Wade ran his fingers through his hair and avoided looking at her as he relayed the recent developments. Let me get this straight, she said, coming to stand in front of him, arms crossed, eyes locked with his. Your mother and your sister are excited about my coming, and you want me to send me back because you think your nephew or your crazy sister-in-law will upset me. Yeah? That's hardly a deal breaker. Her curt response put him on edge. Well, just fine then. Time for the kill shot. My mother thinks you're my fiance. What? I said, my mother, I heard what you said. Her voice edged up a notch, and he didn't miss the slight crack in her composure. Where did she get that idea? She didn't move as he explained how Sheila's plan to dissuade Lucy from pursuing him had backfired when she'd immediately gone to their mother for confirmation. I'm sorry things got so out of hand. I tried to phone before you left, but missed you. His heart hammered as he braced himself for the explosion sure to come next, almost like that time he walked through a minefield wondering which step would be his last. She stared for several heartbeats, eyes wide, lips parted. With a shake of her head, she blinked twice. What will you tell your mother? Her simple question took him completely by surprise, and it took a moment to process. What? She closed her eyes again and inhaled, then blew it out through pursed lips. Once, twice. He admired her control. The helpless feeling engulfing him since yesterday threatened to send him over the edge. His palms were sweaty, his heart pounded like a jackhammer, and getting enough air in his lungs took monumental effort. Yet she just took a couple of deep breaths and acted, well, normal. What will your mother say when I don't show up? She opened her eyes and shoved her hands into her back pockets, her gaze sweeping him before focusing on something outside the window. He had no practical answer, so remained silent. She appears to be expecting me, and, well, her health. He tried to shake the fog from his brain. I'll think of something. Of course I will. I'm a magician now and have complete control over everything and everyone in my life. But you said she hasn't smiled much since she thought you had fiancé, Mrs. Morgan. She thinks you're my fiancé. He ran his fingers through his hair again, unable to meet her dumbfounded gaze, and that it was love at first sight.
You really set us up with some great tension there
Yeah.
and a great premise. That's wonderful.
Thank you. It was my first book, and there was a lot went into it, and I've learned a lot since then, and I like to think I've grown as a writer. Every book you write should be better than the one you did before, and I think I've done that. Or I hope I have anyway.
Definitely, because you've built quite a fan base. So
I have.
if they're clamoring for your next book, then you
Mhm.
have certainly achieved what you set out to do.
Yeah. And that's the goal, your dream. You're never too old to let your dream live. I saw a motivational thing once that said, if you can dream it, you can achieve it. And uh, just persevere and persist, and you'll do it.
Well, Nancy, I think that's a great place for us to end our chat today because I was going to ask you for advice for writers over 50, and I think you summed it up right there.
Just do it.
So
Just do it. You're never too old.
I feel the same way, and that's why I started Authors Over 50. So thank you for being one of
Thank you
ours
for having me.
today.
And this is an awesome platform for our group.
Well, I say that we see all the lists for under 30 and under 40, but we don't see them for over 50. And there are a lot of us who still have much to give.
We do. Definitely.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.